Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar. We're going to get started soon. So my name is Jay Srinivasan. I am the co-founder and one of the co-founders and CEO of atSpoke. And today we're going to be chatting with Mike Hamilton, the head of IT at Databricks, about how to think about the service desk and how it's changed in a post-pandemic world. A little bit of context. At atSpoke, we've built a modern workplace service desk, and we're focused on, over the last 4 years, we've been focused on improving the service desk experience to better match how people actually work, be it through chat, be it through using integrations to work with third-party tools, be it to use machine learning to automate the repetitive. And as we've been building out this tool over the last few years, I've had the chance to interact with many great IT leaders. And in particular, I believe I met Mike for the first time a little over 3 years ago. And I've always, in addition to being a world-class IT leader, he's also just a lot of fun to talk to. So Mike, thank you so much for taking the time. Do you want to give a quick introduction about yourself to the audience?
Absolutely, yeah, and thanks for having me. And you're right, we did meet when I was a head of IT for MuleSoft, and now I'm at Databricks. And it was really fun to engage with you in that initial conversation and talk about really the future of where things are going. And then after that, we got acquired, and it was fun to see where you guys came out on the other side. I felt like I went into a slight coma after being acquired because you get so focused on integration that you don't look at the rest of the world for a while. And when I woke up, I was like, oh wow, Spoke has matured a lot, since our first conversation. This is great. And now you're at Spoke. This is very exciting. So journey-wise, yeah, I've probably got one of the more interesting stories of an IT leader in the sense that I started actually in help desk about 22 years ago, worked my way up through engineering and architecture, data center architecture being one of my final senior roles before moving into leadership. I've also been in sales engineering, solutions architecture, customer service, and then I got back into IT at MuleSoft partly because the culture of the company was super interesting to me, and running IT, which has the opportunity to touch so many areas of the company at the same time and drive the culture for the company, was just so interesting to me, and had a great run at MuleSoft. Loved the experience there. And now I'm here doing this again. So thanks for having me today. Really excited to talk about, supporting people in the pandemic, really.
Yeah, supporting people in the pandemic is right. And by the way, I think as part of that background, the fact that you have not only played different roles, but also worked with different teams within companies, be it sales ops, be it support functions, et cetera, I think is part of the value of this conversation for folks, where we're going to talk about what it means to have a perspective to serve everybody in the company, every team in the company.
Right on.
So for today's conversation, here is the sort of high level set of topics that we're going to walk through. I'm going to spend probably the first 5 to 10 minutes sharing some data that the atSpoke team has been able to pull on how COVID-19 has impacted the work that IT and HR teams have been doing. And one of the benefits of our tool is that we're able to look at de-identified aggregated data across all atSpoke users and sort of understand the trends behind it. And so I want to be walking through some of that and specifically look at some service desk metrics. But the vast majority of the conversation today is going to be about Mike and his team at Databricks. We had a few chats before this webinar started about their philosophy, and I think it's fascinating. There are some potentially contrarian things, contrarian perspectives that the team has in order to better serve end users. And so we're going to spend the vast majority of our time actually talking about Databricks service desk philosophy and how Databricks drives efficiency. We're also going to leave 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions, so please feel free to ask questions as we're going along, and we'll make sure to address them at the end. So first, let's actually jump into the impact of COVID-19 as we see it in our data across IT and HR teams. And essentially, I think the story of the data is these two charts on the right. Let's start with the bottom right chart. So the bottom right chart talks about the percentage of IT and HR tickets that are related to COVID. And the first thing that you'll see, obviously, is that it all started around the 1st of March. And the blue line at the bottom, in the bottom graph, is actually HR tickets. The red line is IT tickets. And what we're representing here is of 100, let's say you get 100 tickets every day, how many of those were related to COVID? So you'll see that HR started getting requests a little before IT. And in the early days of shelter in place and this new way of work, there was a significant portion of HR tickets were related to COVID. The things that people asked about were, hey, what do we do if we get sick? What is our what changes are there in our benefits? How do we communicate? Do we have a contingency plan? What is our cleaning plan in the office, et cetera? And so there was a spike of tickets early on for HR teams, and then it's sort of stabilized at around 1% of all tickets right now. So as recently as July, around 1% of daily tickets coming into HR teams are related to COVID. IT started, I'd say, like half a week to a week after HR in terms of getting COVID requests. And you'll see that it wasn't, it was only around 1% at any point in time. Slightly over 1% of all tickets were COVID related, and now it's stabilized to around 0.5%. And the vast majority of IT requests have to do with things around working from home. Support for working from home, chat tools, Zoom, email lists, hardware, work from home supplies, et cetera. So that's sort of just in terms of the daily requests coming in, what's coming to IT and HR from COVID. The interesting chart on the top right actually talks about how we've seen volume to IT, HR, and facilities teams change after COVID started. And let's start with the obvious one first, which is facilities. You'll see that around March 1st, the yellow line on the top right chart, there was a big spike. It went up like 30%. And after that, it's basically flatlined at a 10 or 20%, which is not particularly surprising. No one's in the office anymore, and so their ticket volume has slowed down significantly. You'll see this interesting spike around the 1st of June, which has to do with, I think, companies thinking about, hey, maybe we can start coming back to the office. And so facilities teams started to prepare for that. And then I guess that stopped again. So that's sort of the facilities volume.
It would be really fun to like see a summary of like how many of that is related to their favorite snack being gone, you know, or pre and post. Like now we no longer get snacks, so sorry, the facilities tickets are low, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Or and that's exactly right. So like the things like people visiting the office, what to do around that, lots of vendor management. All of those requests have just completely gone away. And yeah, I think at some point, if you're out of Diet Coke in your kitchen, you can't ping the facilities team anymore. So that is a challenge. IT and HR, though, on the other hand, obviously have not seen that type of drop because people have taken quite well to working from home. The red line is IT, the blue line is HR. Talking about HR first, you'll see that there was a spike around the first days of April. And when we actually looked at the trends behind that spike, some of it's a little bit unfortunate. I think it's like essentially companies preparing for potentially a long shelter-in-place period, thinking about burn rates, thinking about staffing, et cetera. So there was a lot of HR activity in the early days of shelter-in-place. There's lots of offboarding requests, for example. There were some other requests as well. Since then, though, the big takeaway here is that 10 to 15, the broad IT traffic, the HR traffic that we're seeing is 10 to 15% lower now than it was pre-COVID. So when you actually look at what requests have dropped, things around travel, expense policies are the things that have mainly dropped, but things around benefits, payroll continue. So that's sort of the trend that we've seen on the HR front. IT, on the other hand, has sort of seen this steady increase to around 10 to 15% higher post-COVID than pre-COVID. So essentially, the IT teams are, and the folks on this webinar today, you are busier. You're not imagining it. Your traffic is definitely up, and that's something that we see across the board. One interesting point here, I've been looking at sort of other metrics around how IT ticket traffic has increased post-COVID, and atSpoke probably has the lowest increase that we've seen. It's around 10 to 15%. There's certain vendors that have seen like a 50, 100% increase in their ticket volume. And we'll talk about why that is, but some of it relates to already being ready for work from home versus not. So that's sort of the high level ticket volume trends. Going to the next slide, I think part of the habits have changed as we have moved to work from home. And one of the most obvious but just insightful things that we're able to pull from our data is when tickets are coming in on a daily basis. And so if you look at the graph on the right, this is, the blue line is when during a day you would get a ticket typically for what percentage of tickets came at any hour of the day. pre-COVID, and then the red line is post-COVID. And this is sort of fascinating how consistent this data was and how smooth it was. But essentially, you'll see that all tickets just got shifted forward an hour or so. And when you think about it, it's pretty obvious it's because the commute's gone. And so literally, folks are at their computers pinging their IT colleagues or their HR colleagues 1 hour earlier every day. And this is just something that that we see. I think the implication of this is that you need to think about it. A lot of behaviors have not changed since work from home started, but some behaviors have changed, like things like your commute being gone. And so part of the conversation that we should be having is, what are the obvious things that have changed and how should IT support that? But also, what are the sort of second order effects? Like, for example, the lack of a commute means you need to change your staffing strategy to support folks an hour earlier. So that's one of the things that we saw post-COVID versus pre-COVID. Now, one of the benefits of a tool like atSpoke is that we recognize that a lot of internal tickets, a lot of internal requests are repetitive. And so our system's machine learning tries to either auto-respond to requests or automatically triage requests. And across all of our customers in this time period, we saw that something like 20% of all tickets were actually auto-resolved with the knowledge base entry. And for the tickets that were service requests, 85% were automatically triaged. The point I make here is, even if your ticket volume has gone up, keep in mind that a lot of that is repetitive stuff that you could think about ways to efficiently automate, either using a tool like atSpoke or just having better knowledge bases and resources available for folks. One interesting thing that we did see post-COVID versus pre-COVID is that median resolution times across the board have dropped by something like 34%. In other words, folks are just responding and taking care of tickets quicker. We could talk about like various reasons and various hypotheses around why this is happening. Possibly there's less distractions, there's less context switching for support teams. People are just a little bit more responsive and trying to be helpful to their colleagues at this time. But it is sort of a heartening thing to see across the board, across our customers. We saw a significant drop in resolution times. Essentially, everyone's providing better service during this time period. And then one of the big things that we see in our data that is sort of incredibly consistent is the impact of tools like Slack and chat tools. If you're no longer in the office, if you can no longer swing by your IT colleague's desk, if you can no longer just yell across the aisle and ask for something, how do you best communicate with your with your colleagues? And a fundamental trend that we're seeing in our customers as well as new customers is that people are embracing chat tools more. And so what you see on the left is the percentage of tickets that came in from different channels, Slack, email, and web, before COVID and after COVID. First of all, nearly 55% of all tickets in atSpoke, even before COVID, came in from Slack. But we've seen that percentage increase to 63% now. And where that drop has really come from, the channels that have dropped are mainly email and web. And in particular, web has probably dropped the most on a percentage basis. And we're pretty sure that's because there's no longer drive-bys and walk-ups to the IT team where a ticket is created in front of them on the web app, and instead folks are pinging. Folks are pinging their IT colleagues on Slack. The same, and it's not just about saying, hey, we're providing a more convenient way to communicate with your colleagues through Slack. It's also about the performance benefits of using a tool like Slack with a ticketing system like atSpoke. Across all of our customers, when we look at tickets that come in, or organizations that use Slack versus Slack teams, any chat tool, versus organizations that don't use chat, the chat organizations respond to tickets twice as fast. There's they've seen a larger decrease in response times post-COVID, and they've seen a large decrease in resolution times post-COVID as well. So the organizations that are using chat were already kind of prepared for some of the effects of COVID in terms of shelter in place, and that actually translates to a better experience for their colleagues. And so those were sort of the high-level stats that I wanted to just share across all of our organizations as it relates to pre and post-COVID. But as I said, what I'd love to spend the majority of our conversation on today is actually Mike and how the Databricks team sort of delivers a world-class IT experience. So Mike, let's jump into a quick overview from your side in terms of what your broad philosophy of the role of IT at Databricks is? And in particular, can you also talk, just to start the conversation, can you talk about how your team has felt the change from pre and post COVID and sort of how you prepared for that?
Yeah, it's funny with the preparation side because we actually we decided as a company to go remote about a week before most other companies did, but it was extremely abrupt. In fact, the Tuesday of the week we decided, we did a test, and the test was, is everybody going to be able to get at everything if they work from home? So what we did is we had the whole company work from home. And then we watched everything very carefully, and we found that, like, hey, nothing blew up. Coincidentally, then, not really coincidentally, but rather like based on the confirmation from that work, the whole company decided to go remote 2 days later. So it was like a really quick turnaround, but we were happy with the results, and we were concerned about the oncoming onset of the pandemic. But what did happen, as you can imagine, and I think this has really happened for most people, is that there's a set of folks that are just super used to walking up to IT and going like, hey, can you give me some help with this? And it's beneficial for both of us, right? Face recognition, we all get to sort of be a community and help each other out. But then from that point on, there's some of those folks that also didn't know that there was a way to reach IT otherwise, right? So you have this little slight education window that has to happen around like, hey, by the way, now that nobody's in the office, this is what you do. And we've just handled the service accordingly. But we're in a very technical company where the typical baseline employee is pretty technical to begin with, and yet still walk-ups are the preferred way to go because it's just perceived as faster. So we had a little bit of friction around making that transition. And I'm glad you asked about philosophy, because my philosophy around ticket handling goes way back to when I was a help desk person myself, and really goes into the concept of triage. And I love this quote that I found on triage, is to provide the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of individuals. The idea behind triage is that you don't do things in series. You don't take them in as like, look, you'll be helped in the order that you came in. It's not a deli, right? IT is not running an IT deli. We're not a deli that serves laptops instead of sandwiches. What we have is when somebody's coming to us for help, they can't work to some degree. They're either impaired or they flat out can't work. And there's a cost, a very real cost to the business when someone can't work. And if you think about ticket duration, then based on severity and time that someone's impaired, it starts to really have a dollar figure associated with it. But it's not a dollar figure that people are typically asking for. In spite of my philosophy being around triage, I've never been asked for a report of like how much does a typical laptop incident cost us. But also, usually my team is very praised for the fact that, hey, I felt like I got help quickly. And the way that I like to think about it is that it's really important for the people on the front line to say, you know what, I can help. I have 5 people in front of me. I can help these 3 people in about 15 minutes combined. And then the other 2 people are going to take about an hour. Let me see what I can do to get the 3 people that take 15 minutes solved as quickly as humanly possible, and then get these other 2 folks helped when we can give them the right amount of focus. Because the other bit is like, the more you're breaking your stream of consciousness trying to help somebody with a more difficult problem, the longer it's actually going to take. And then it ends up being detrimental to both sides. IT is a constrained resource. We've only got so many resources we can help with, as well as this person's not working. And if we're constantly being interrupted, it's difficult to help them. So I think that that philosophy has been very successful in general. And I can tell you a story around the first time I encountered, like, I kind of think that way out of the box. It's just sort of the way my service brain works. I've always been that way. And I can tell you a story from my past that shocked the heck out of a person. So I had been at this company maybe like a month, and this person slacks me and says like, hey, so-and-so's got a serious issue in this conference room. And I had a very small staff at the time. They were all busy. So I just ran downstairs really quick to see what was going on. And I walked into the conference room, and this person had spilled their drink on their laptop. And the worst part about this is she's about to give a presentation to the chief technology officer. So it's 5 minutes into the hour, spills a drink, nervous, spills a drink on her laptop. The thing's totally toast. I grab the laptop and run upstairs. I'm like, guys, what can we do? They're like, let's swap the SSD out with a different laptop. So we just like pull her SSD out, swap it into their laptop. In 10 minutes, we had a laptop sitting back in there, and she freaked out. She was like, what? But that's not exactly why she freaked out, by the way. Like, yes, that was cool. It was super cool, right? Like, the team came to the table, they got her back up and running. That's a P0, right? She can't work. She's got a presentation to give. I mean, interestingly enough, this is in the days before everything was in Google Drive, right? So this is literally a presentation on her laptop, right? There's no other way to get this thing. The part that shocked her was, and later I talked to her about this, she goes, nobody yelled at me. Like I
Yeah.
spilled a drink on my laptop and nobody yelled at me, and you fixed it.
Yeah.
And I think there's an element of that that's super important from the psychology of the culture, right? That like the culture of the company is everything. The culture of IT is everything, because we actually need people to work with us. So if I slice down another layer deep on my philosophy, is that the opportunity for IT is that we're like the connective tissue. We're the circulatory system of the business. We touch every department. There are problems to be solved in the business where the person facing the problem does not even realize or know that technology is a possible solution. And for us to get in and solve that, we have to be A, trusted, and B, exposed.
Yeah.
Right? We have to be a trusted resource, but also we have to have high exposure. It's got to be like, where do I like I've got, it's not that I need to know where to find you. It's that like you came to fix this, you saw that I was struggling with this, and you found me a resource over here that I was actually helping me get a real business problem solved. And I think that's actually the opportunity that IT needs to be well positioned to seize. So at a high level, that's my philosophy around triage and sort of the value that IT brings. And I hope that lends itself well to the conversation here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're going to dive into each of those, but I just want to like sort of compliment you on two things that you said. One, the obvious thing around no one yelled at me, right? I think that is, first of all, I will say by and large, most of the teams that we work with, they have sort of a very forward-thinking mentality in terms of what it means to provide excellent employee experience while also setting up a world-class IT process. And so like the notion of saying, hey, I care about employee experience implies that it's less about, hey, IT's doing you a favor, yell at you, versus
Totally.
actually effectively serving you. So that's amazing. But I actually also kudos on the testing out shelter in place a week earlier, and also trying to see if something works. It kind of reminds me of I think Chaos Monkey or whatever the tool Netflix uses, where every now and then, my previous startup, we did mobile testing. And one of the most effective ways to test your app was just to run the worst case scenario and see what
Right.
would actually work. And you were able to do that a week ahead, which is awesome. Let's actually dive into a few points around your philosophy. The first thing that so one of the things about atSpoke is we've built the tool in such a way that multiple teams in an organization can use it at the same time, but also it is as intuitive for someone in the HR team, the marketing team, the sales ops team, as it is for someone in IT. So we've taken the notion of product design quite seriously, where we need to provide the power that an IT ticketing system requires with the usability that any team in a company can use it. And one of the characteristics of the way Databricks uses atSpoke is that it is a front end to multiple teams in a company. So do you want to talk about it? When we were chatting previously, you mentioned, hey, if you had your way, there would just be one search bar that said what's wrong, and that's all people needed to provide. How do you think about providing a single front door to make it easier for employees?
I really like the idea of not having to know where to go. So I think one of the ways that organizations are unintentionally inefficient for employee experience is that the employee has to spend a lot of energy trying to figure out how to get a problem solved. And that's not productive time for them. It's like, how do I get this problem solved? What do I do? And to give you kind of a funny story on like my first startup that I ever worked for was a super small 15-person company. And on the day I signed my offer letter, they're like, hey, by the way, your desk is over there and so's your chair. Can you build it before you start? Right. And then, and then you start the company and you have to go like, gosh, can I get a Salesforce account? And can I get this other account? And like, you end up having this seek time. It's almost like the old hard drive terminology around seek time, that like I have to spend a bunch of energy finding what I need. So I loved the idea when I first talked to you originally with the product of really creating a single front door. Like there's only one place that an employee has to look to find something, and then we don't have to. Hopefully, this is able to give me a curated experience to at least route me the right way. And it also plays into the story I told you around the much more complex ticketing system that I was involved in setting up in a prior life as well, where it's a very complex ticketing system. We had to have professional services come in to do it. We were looking to extract a certain amount of value from this very complex tool. And I kind of broke their professional services team, because they come in and they're like, all right, so what do you want to ask the user up front? I'm like, what's wrong? I'm like, okay, what else? I'm like, that's it. And they're like, well, you don't want the user to categorize the ticket? I'm like, no, because they're unreliable. Like first of all, it slows them down because now it's a barrier to entry. They have to answer too many questions. And second of all, they're unreliable. Like if they were able to troubleshoot their own issue, they wouldn't be asking for help. So I really don't care. What I really want to do is make sure we can help them. And quite frankly, at MuleSoft, one of the things that we had embedded into the IT culture is that because we work so closely with other G&A functions, we would actually know who to route you to in some cases. So this is before Spoke. We didn't have this ability to unify the experience for the employees, but as a team, we all in G&A agreed to try to unify the experience as much as possible. Since IT had so much more of the front door traffic, it was almost like, yeah, I helped you fix your laptop, but I also happen to overhear you talking about an HR issue. Why don't you go talk to Gina? She happens to run that side of it, right? So it's kind of an early exposure to this notion that, first of all, IT is connective tissue. We're your circulatory system. We can help you, but also, like, God, it would be great if there was a product that gave me one front door for this, where employees don't have to know where to engage to get the right answer, because it's costly to the business if people have to spend a ton of time chasing these things down. I mean, I also love the context awareness as well. In fact, I remember one of the selling points to me of your solution was atSpoke could actually be set up for just an event. Like, hey, we've got this huge holiday party coming up or a huge conference coming up that we're running. Yeah. And like, we need to answer employee questions about this in that context, but it'll go away. But like, hey, here's a curator. They can manage the content for this while it's going on. And then the employees know that it's the same front door to get in there. And so I really just like the concept, because I think the seek time that employees have is one of the barriers to really streamlining operations and being efficient.
Totally. The one thing that you said in terms of designing this basically this phone tree or drop down thing of, hey, you choose what your issue is, what the category is, what the subcategory is, what the components are, is obviously one of the challenges there is accuracy. Different people have different perspectives of what the right answer is. One of the things that at atSpoke we are quite passionate about is this notion of applying design to enterprise products, like product design to enterprise products. And Jordan, our head of design, has this philosophy where he says, hey, you know what's better than, so the worst experience in his mind is to have an insanely long drop-down menu that everyone has to fill out every time, right? Because there's accuracy, but it's also not a great customer experience. So step one is maybe eliminate that and have an expert classify it, which in this case would be the IT team. What's even cooler though is can you use machine learning to infer what the category is? And so I think when we think about request type classification, when we think about triage, that is what we're trying to do. How do we use machine learning and design to still provide the benefit of a well-classified ticket, except not have either a non-expert do it or not have the expert do it in a repetitive fashion? So
absolutely. And anticipate, in my mind, anticipation is the ultimate achievement in customer service. Anticipating a need is the ultimate achievement. And I think IT, I like to look at it this way, and I've been using this analogy a lot because I really like it, is that you know, at the bottom of IT, we have these things we have to provide, which is like the network's got to be running, all the services have to be there, IT's got, you know, identity has to be managed, all these things have to work, right? And that's a baseline expectation. If you're looking for a pat on the back or an attaboy or a bonus or anything for doing the baseline expectation, good luck. Right? Yeah. People expect that to work, and you're going to get funded minimally as an IT department to make sure that happens. Above that is that you're trying to provide a good experience for people. And so you're thinking about employee experience over, you know, just baseline services. In other words, I walk into a conference room and I don't have to have a thing to tell me how to use it. Right? It just kind of works. And when I signed in this morning, there was a new app that was available, and I didn't have to know that it was, like, I didn't have to have somebody tell me. It appeared in my tiles, and I was able to use it. But at the pinnacle of this is being able to say, based on your interest or your problem here, we anticipate you also have a friction here, right? Or being able to sort of infer that. And I think that's really the pinnacle achievement. And the metaphor I want to give is the layer cake metaphor. In IT, we don't get the luxury of eating this cake one layer at a time. So if somebody told you I have to eat this whole layer cake, and you go like, okay, well, one strategy would be I take one layer at a time and I eat the whole layer off it. No. In IT, we have to slice the whole cake at once. We've got to think about, like, how do I provide the baseline services? How do I do it in a way that provides a great user experience? And anywhere possible, can I infer or figure out other areas of friction that we can solve for somebody, and then ideally automate that?
For sure. So I'm gonna build on that a little, and also go back to a previous point that you made around triage and getting to the P0s fast. And since we've been talking about delis, we had to put in a picture from Seinfeld. So let's talk about this, right? So
cinnamon babka versus the chocolate babka, right? Yeah.
there we go. Clearly, I think it's also like dating all of us on this right now. But
I'm sorry. Yeah. Right.
But here's the thing. It is interesting to me. So when I was looking at your metrics, there's actually a metric that you have, in your case, chosen to have a lower value for than what we see in a lot of organizations, which is first call resolution. So I have spoken to IT leaders where it is incredibly important to them that their first call resolution rates are as high as possible. Versus in your case, your first call resolution rates are a little bit lower than some of our best customers on that metric, but your total resolution time, potentially CSAT, et cetera, is much, much higher. So talk about how you as an IT leader think about which metrics to optimize for, and specifically in this case, first call resolution versus overall experience.
So I think there's two ways to break this down. The first one is in terms of expectation, and the second one is really, actually I forgot what the second thing was, but that's okay. Let's just talk through it for a second here. So like, on the expectation front, let's pick the Genius Bar for a second here. If I have to go to the Genius Bar to fix a Mac for something like personal device or something like that, and I know that my issue only takes 5 minutes to solve, it is super infuriating to sit there and go like, you mean I have to wait? And I've worked in companies where it's serialized, right? So take a number, deli style. And the problem is that the anticipation alone of the fact that I know you can fix my issue in 5 minutes, maybe it's something I just don't have access to, right? Like I know what the fix is, but I just am not empowered to fix it, right? There's nothing more infuriating than going like, dude, I know this is going to take 30 seconds. If I could talk to you, you know it's going to take 30 seconds. But realistically, we can't get there, can we? Because the system's not designed to support that. And, one way you can approach that, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's the same thing at the DMV. It's the same thing at, and what I was saying, like, I absolutely at some point post-pandemic want to start a service where you can get you can go to a bar and get a beer immediately versus having to wait between 3 super complex cocktails. I mean, this principle applies in so many service functions.
Exactly. And then the other bit is engagement. So, and what I mean by that is that like, so do I have your attention right now or not? And I'll give you an example. So if first call resolution is the top priority, here's the challenge. Suppose it's not a P0. Suppose it's a P1. I'm just impaired. All right. From a matter of perspective, I'm actually stuck on the call with you while you try to solve something that's only impairing me.
Yeah.
Right. At which point it might be better to just say triage, you're not dying.
Yeah.
When can we work with you that's better? As an example, even in the physical world, the pre-COVID world, where I might walk up to IT and go like, look guys, can you look at this and tell me I'm not actually broken. I'm just working slower, but can you just tell me how long you think this will take to fix? And they go, last time I saw this, it took me about 30 minutes to get through it. Okay, cool. I can't talk to you right now because I've got to go to a meeting, but can I come back at 3:00? Cool. All right. Well, that's not a first touch resolution, but first touch resolution was the wrong motivation to begin with. What I actually want is cognitive engagement. I need you to show up and be there. I'll be there too. I already know what your problem is. Let's solve it together. So that's why I deprioritize that first touch thing. In fact, I kind of understand the loose logic behind it because it seems like you're saving people time, but I actually don't believe the data would show that. I actually don't think the experience would show that. And our CSAT score is high because I think our model shows respect for the customer's time. That like, look, we're going to do our best to work around you. If it's a P0, we're going to help you right now. But if it's a P1, let's find a time when we can work together. When you're in the right state of mind and I'm in the right state of mind. If you're about to go give a presentation to your boss and I run over, you're not in the right state of mind for me to work with you, right? So I really think that's what it boils down to. And second of all, the user has some degree of determining if it's a P1. We might look at that and go like, I don't know, this looks pretty serious, but they go like, honestly, I'm fine. Can I just get to my meeting really quick and I'll come back, right? They want that assurance and it's a relationship. I've also found that people they really like follow-ups. In fact, one of the things I've coached my teams on over the years is that people are generally okay. Let's start with the notion of I couldn't solve this myself. I'm coming to you because I couldn't solve this myself, right? Okay, cool. And now I've come to you and I couldn't solve this myself and you're not sure either. You're the technical person, but you're not really sure either. So what you tell me is I will get back to you. What I found
Yeah.
from a CSAT perspective is that as long as you actually get back to them on a routine basis, they're still happy, even if it takes a month to solve the issue. And in some cases, it's literally deeply appreciated that it was a touch every day. Just like I
Yeah.
still don't have an answer, but I'm still looking at it. It's just an update. Like, hey, I didn't have to ask for the update. They gave it to me anyway. They showed the initiative. I'm okay with it. Right. So
It's less of a black box, right? You send this email in and you have no idea when you're going to get a response and what's going to happen.
exactly. The update is really part of the relationship. So first of all, respecting our customers' time and saying like, hey, this isn't about me and me getting tickets resolved in one pass. This is about you and when we can work for you and help you as a partner through your issues.
Makes sense. Um, we've been talking about your philosophy and sort of the IT team at Databricks approach to end users and supporting them. But let's actually talk about your internal philosophy in terms of how you organize your teams and your information. One, in addition to sort of this trade-off between first call resolution versus total resolution time in CSAT, another metric from the Databricks data set that stood out for me is the number of request types that your team has versus what we typically see. And just for a little bit of context for folks on the webinar, a request type in atSpoke is essentially when atSpoke is either automatically through machine learning or an agent does it, what it essentially does is it allows you to classify a service request into a specific category so that you know what questions need to be asked, you know what workflow to follow, and you obviously can do analytics and stuff like that around it. And so the idea here is if something is a service workflow, you want it to be a request type because then it's standardized and you can make it more efficient. In your case, Mike, you have 5x the number of request types that we typically see. Sort of, how do you think about this, and what's the rationale here?
Well, what we really want to do is have a strong relationship between support and engineering under the IT umbrella so that what we can look at is how do we improve the customer experience by solving these things at an automation or engineering level while fully engaging. I believe very strongly that, first of all, the engineering team of IT is typically a common growth path for people on the support side of the business, but also that relationship of, hey, we're seeing a surge in this type of request. Does it correlate to some other action, or is it something we can automate? And the correlation bit is equally important. Is there something that's happened that's changed that's causing a correlative spike in an issue type? Did we do something that's causing there to be pain? Because it does measure loss of productivity. So for me, it's less of like, I have a promise that I always make my IT staff, which is that like, if you're on the support side, I'm never going to hold you accountable for the number of tickets you close, because unless it's zero, I might I might change my tune. But honestly, like it's not a case where I'm going to set up production tiers and go, you have to close this many tickets to get promoted or to get your raise at the end of the year. It's more of a CSAT thing. I'm more interested in like what was people's experience with IT, because I think ticket count is just a metric that we can measure, but if it doesn't provide any insight, it's not particularly value. What I'm more looking for with issue types is cause and effect. What's going on in the business? Where did we make a decision that caused a spike in support traffic? It tells me where the bleeding is, which then is something that the engineering team can hopefully help us stop. It could be email group membership. It could be Okta tiles, whatever it is. But we can't look at the caseload and go, this is, we can almost have a little internal pandemic, if you will, right? Since we're on the topic of pandemics, where it's like, hey, this engineering change triggered this pandemic of stuff that happened that caused an uptick on the support side, right? And then that further educates us on, let's try not to do that again. Let's try to learn from it. But also, it does connect the teams better, because cause and effect without accountability and caring about the other team really makes the other team indifferent. You don't want your engineering team to be indifferent to your support team.
Yeah, no, I love the ticket count, right? I mean, again, obviously there it can't be zero. Like, so there are some Uber level metrics around productivity, et cetera. But essentially, the analogy that you're giving here is like measuring a software engineer on lines of code written. It's not about the lines of code written. It is the quality of and throughput, which is essentially the translation here.
Yeah, I love that analogy, because if you've ever seen like Obfuscated Pearl, for example, how many things can you make one line of code do? So if I'm being charged on fewer lines of code, I'm going to make it harder to read. And if I'm being charged on too many, I'm going to have more comments than anybody in the history of coding, Plus, I'm going to probably have some wasted lines that don't do anything.
No,
So
no. Plus, you should import a bunch of libraries. Like, just put them all in.
yeah,
Yeah,
get
exactly.
everything in there. Let's have a gigabyte package, right?
Totally makes sense. Um, we're gonna. We've also started getting some questions, so I'm actually going to. So the question, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the lost human touch of walk-ups as it relates to this post-pandemic world and for the foreseeable future. Let's say work from home for a lot of organizations. And sort of one of the questions that's come in is also how do you continue to build trust in an all-remote environment? So I think the two are related. You're not. Yeah, but just start there.
I think the key of building trust is actually urgency, a sense of urgency. So in the post-COVID environment, really having a sense of urgency is key. And what I told my team when we first went on a company-wide work from home was, we have, like, for example, a very small staff in EMEA, to say the least. And what I told my North America staff is, like, I need you guys to be prepared to wake up in the middle of the night just in case, because we actually don't know what's going to happen here. We did a during the day test. We're pretty sure one test went really, really well, but let's make sure we're there to support Rob in EMEA. But realistically, the reason behind that is not just to save Rob from, like, hey, here's a glut of tickets, but also to make sure we're providing a good user experience and that we're responsive. So lack of responsive, like, what people look for on the human touch side is, like, am I working with somebody that truly cares about me? And how do I know that? Well, in a physical world, I know that because I can see your face and and I can see your body language, and I can know that you're caring about what I'm doing. In a remote workforce, it's more about, like, this was important, and you got right back to me, and you were able to help me right away. The other bit is we do use video conferencing quite a lot. So in cases where engagement's really important, we do get on a video call and make sure that the camera's turned on. And as a company, we actually had an edict go out that said that you need to have your camera turned on for videos. So for support and for just general meetings, it's like, hey, let's try to keep the human side of it there, because there's so much more to communication than words. There's inflection and there's facial expression. There's a lot of other things. And the reality is somebody who's good at that face-to-face is going to be just as good at it on video once they get used to it, right? So it's been an interesting practice. In fact, speaking for myself personally, I would say up until about 6 weeks into the pandemic, I was still convinced that we'd probably go back to the way things used to be, and I will just not develop these skills of being better at video calls. Like, I'm okay at them, but I don't have to be amazing at them. What I realized after that is that it's actually a skill I really need to develop to make people feel connected to me, to make sure that I'm doing a really good job in these video calls, but also that that will translate into being better. If things get back to some definition of normal at some point, I would like to be better and more cognitively engaged with the folks that are attending a meeting remotely. So I think that there's a downstream effect from this after we're in a different state from where we are today, where the skills I'm investing now are also going to be good when I'm like, hey, we should be more inclusive of the folks that are on video calls right now, because they're not physically here. And I may have been kind of dismissive before without realizing it. So,
that's actually, that actually feeds into another question that we've received as part of this webinar, which is how to promote consistency in how people are treated, but also the notion of inclusivity. So, like, for example, if I were to take this, the video needs to be on. It could be that some people have a better work from home setup than others. So how do you think about that role, like where each person might have a unique situation that they might be going through right now, and sort of what is the role there?
Yeah, I totally get it. And, like, I think the great leveler, and I will tell people when this happens in a call that I think it's awesome, is that everybody's circumstances come into play at some point. And so to give a specific example, when someone's child, in one case, a particular colleague of mine was pretty much wearing their child like a hat in the middle of a call out of nowhere. In other cases, it's been a cat that's been a scarf that's for an employee. We all have these little moments. And I think what it's important is to culturally say, like, hey, don't worry about it. Like, in fact, we shouldn't even really be making a big deal about it. Everybody's in the same situation right now. It's going to be okay. But as a company, we also ran into this idea that we had been funding remote workers. So if you're full-time remote when you were hired, there was a budget set aside for making sure that you had some money to help you outfit your office. And immediately we had a sort of quiet program around a little bit of a stipend for those who had a need that we could figure out, like, hey, these people are actually raising the issue. There's not a formal program being announced, but, you know, we'll give you some help and we'll make sure there's money allocated for that. When the company realized that, like, hey, you know, this is actually more of a problem than we thought. Like, some people don't have desks. It's not just like keyboards and mouses that people need. It's like, I don't have a comfortable chair and now my back is hurting, or I don't have a proper desk to work on, or I need a monitor. The company decided to come out with a better program, quite frankly. And so we ended up offering the same remote allowance that we offer people who are hired remote. This is going to be longer. It sounds like it's a program that will probably stick long-term as well, in the sense that it turns out people's home office is pretty important, and they don't necessarily prioritize it when you're in this world where the office is outfitted with snacks and it's got drinks and it's got this experience you're trying to create, without realizing that, like, hey, these people work a lot when they're at home too. So yeah. I'm really proud of the company's effort on that and making such a priority around helping people fix their home workspace as best as possible. And unfortunately, you know, as much as we've tried though too, there are some folks that, like, hey, I was in a roommate situation before and we're in a tiny apartment in San Francisco, and we're both on calls at the same time and it's driving me crazy. Like, there's very little we can do for those folks right now, which breaks my heart, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, like some tactical things, backgrounds, like Zoom backgrounds help with
Totally.
With that. Headphones help with that. To your point around work from home, setting up your work from home, we made the call at atSpoke around a week and a half ago now to say, look, this isn't going to change for a bit. And so we're officially remote for the team. We still have our office, but the team's going to be officially remote for the next year at least. And to that situation where someone's stuck in a small apartment and two folks, et cetera, one of the things that we've shared with the team is, look, no one's going to be, even if everything goes back to normal in 3 months and we're all back in the office, no one's going to be penalized, for example, if they move out of commuting distance to get to a better space right now.
Totally.
So bottom line, do what's right for you to be comfortable. And we also went with a stipend to set up your work from home setup, right? Like get a standing desk, take your monitor, all that stuff. So no, totally hear you on that. I want to, again, this is around serving end users, but let's again talk about the IT team. What is your advice to the IT leaders that are listening to this webinar to say, hey, when you're no longer able to be in person with your colleagues, with the executive team, et cetera, how do you still make sure that IT has a say in what is done in the organization? How do you get a seat at the table in this remote world?
So it's interesting because the role of CIO over the 22 years that I've been in this industry doesn't always have a seat at the table. In fact, it's unfortunately a relatively rare thing that the CIO does have a seat at the table anymore. But I've found that the right way to get what you need is to be a partner. And being a partner is an active role. It means that I have to seek out relationships with as much of the business as I can manage, to have relationships with and understand the value prop, which really means talking to other people about their problems, right? What hurts? What's the friction point for you? How can we help? We can't help everybody, but by having the connections, it does make it, and building a portfolio of things that could be done in the business, it's much easier to have the conversation around resourcing, staffing, and getting engaged in the business priorities. The second part is that I've found that my experience in startups and having done this more than once lends itself value as I am able to articulate in conversations with my partners what I think they're going through, or how something they just told me impacts the rest of the business. And that requires insight, and it requires really trying to understand the machine that I work in, right? Like we're all tweaking this rocket ship right now. How does one thing affect another thing? But by offering insights to my peers in the business, it does build confidence, and it builds a sense of empathy verification, right? They're like, oh, you are empathetic with us. You actually were able to take a set of things I verbally told you, correlate them to something that somebody else is telling you that I wasn't even aware of, and articulate something that's meaningful. So it takes time to build that. But like I always tell my staff, you know, you can lead by authority if you have it. Sure. That's a given. Everybody who takes an executive job is given authority when you're given that job. But regardless, you have to lead by influence. And I learned to lead by influence by managing groups of volunteers from the time I was in high school all the way in through adulthood, and even up until including now. I believe everybody's a volunteer. My employees come to work voluntarily. I pay them. We pay them as a company, but they're still there voluntarily, and they're there because they want to do something cool. And so when we manage by influence, it's also taking that same motivation of, hey, we're all owners here, we're all trying to get something out of this, and really using the influence to build the right position in the company. So in other words, you don't necessarily get a seat at the executive table, but you can certainly earn the influence to have what you need to be successful.
I love that. A conversation that I've had in the past with some other IT leaders is making sure that you have a cadence of checking in with leads. So, hey, especially now in this world, to say you're going to go chat with the marketing team, you're going to go chat with the HR team, understand sort of what has changed in their tool stack and what are pain points that now exist in this post-COVID world for their teams, and starting to address it are all different ways to essentially build that influence, to earn that influence. So that makes a lot of sense. We're almost out of time, and I still have a few more questions that we've been receiving that I want to make sure to get to.
Sure.
One very tactical question. Someone was curious about your team's atSpoke integration with Jira. For a little bit of context for the folks on the webinar, atSpoke allows you to take any ticket that has come into atSpoke and push it into Jira. And sort of the primary, and the same thing with ServiceNow, the same thing with any other ticketing system. And sort of the primary use case that across our customers that we see for that is, hey, engineering is still using Jira for sprint planning. Sometimes IT gets an issue, sometimes another team, the DevOps, somebody gets an issue that needs to be added to a engineering sprint. And so they basically lock the ticket in atSpoke and push it out into Jira. Is that how you use it at Databricks? Is there anything else in terms of that integration for you?
Yeah, there's really two ways that we use it. So we even have the security team involved in using it for certain types of incident reports, for incident response. But it is a case where we're correlating something that's come in with a project that needs to be done. And what I like about the nature of integrations in this case is that we don't have to lose resolution. In other words, the high resolution picture that you get from the work you've done to understand the problem, you can just pipe that directly in, and now the history is not lost, and I don't have to chair switch to get back to the original context. So it's possible to understand the original context, but then keeping the engineering folks in the tool that they're used to, that they're running their sprints out of. So that really has most of the work there. The other bit is around things like change control. So sometimes an issue will come in, like I need access to this at a different level, at which point I require that that's something tracked in change control. And so it allows us to trigger a change control incident from that and have direct correlation. This spoke number, atSpoke number correlates with this Jira number, and this is how the approval came in. Now it's approved over here. Go ahead and do it.
Perfect. I think I literally have gotten 7 questions about this. How are you dealing with IT hardware and work from home?
So we have actually noticed a slightly higher failure rate as people have been working from home. And our best hypothesis right now is just that people are leaving their laptops in less than ideal situations, or using them in less than ideal situations. Maybe they're stuffed up against a blanket or a comforter or a sweater or something, or maybe next to an open window in a more humid environment. It's really hard to say, but we have noticed an uptick. And we are spending significantly more money on shipping than we ever have. And so what that's requiring us to do then is keep, we are having to send somebody into the office to manage the inventory going out. There's really no other choice there. And we are spending a lot of money on shipping right now to ensure that people are getting what they need. But we are having to respond to some of these issues, get assets out really, really quickly. And in some cases, we're able to use our zero-touch provisioning to get people back online. But in case of hardware failures, it's pretty tough. I saw another question come in around, like, how do you guys package the work from home improvements thing? And honestly, like when this first came out, I was like, listen, guys, to the executive team, I can't manage shipping. As is, the shipping resources are strained enough. It's per geo in terms of how available stuff is going to be. Also, just to fill you guys in, I don't want any of this stuff back. Like, I don't want to maintain a room where I've got 35 different kinds of mouses and keyboards and all this sort of stuff. So the way that we managed it, quite frankly, is we came out with recommendations for bigger ticket items like monitors, even some smaller things like, here's some common mouses. If you were curious what you had in the office, this is the model we have in the office. So people would have some context. And if they wanted to spend over the budget out of their own pocket, they were welcome to at least try to get up to parity with what we give them in the office. But certainly I don't want to manage all this equipment. And it's just kind of an investment that we're making in our employees to say that, like, look, at the same time that this is some significant money for the company, it's also we don't have, like, I'm not running a reclamation unit here for this. This is a pandemic. In my opinion, the ROI for something that if you spend $500 on an employee to work from home, the ROI is pretty much in the first year that they work for it anyway. At that point, they've gotten their value. The item's depreciated enough where it's not worth bringing back in inventory anyway. So it's really just not worth making an accounting exercise out of this. The laptop, though, is the exception to that rule. The laptop's got to come back. There's no way we could do it any other way. So
I'm gonna stop sharing for a second as we sort of start wrapping up. I think one of the things I always want to make sure that we do in these webinars is make sure that folks have some tactical takeaways, things that they can go do immediately. And as I think about our conversation, beyond the very specific thing around a work from home budget, maybe a bundle, the shipping and processes around that, the sort of big takeaways that I have, one is maybe don't get hung up on first call resolution as the only metric that matters. Think about the overall satisfaction, think about the overall service experience. Something around a single front door. Hey, a single front door, folks don't necessarily know where to go. Make sure that you're providing an easy front door. Don't make your end users too much classification. You can do the triage. And then that was a theme. Serialization versus focusing on P0s first. Those are some of the immediate takeaways. Any other advice that you'd have for the folks, like things that the folks listening to this can go do today, the next week, to sort of help out their team?
Yeah, so I do have one thing around CSAT. To me, CSAT is the most valuable metric. And again, when I ask for CSAT data, I try not to bother people that much. But I approach CSAT in two different ways. One of them is with per ticket CSAT. And what that gives you is a measurement of people you're actively engaging with. And really my purpose in that is trying to get follow-ups. I have an outstanding leader of my support team, and he is always following up on anything that comes in low at all, quite frankly, because the follow-up opportunity is really important. But here's the problem with per ticket CSAT is that it only gives you one slice of the picture, and that is folks that are interacting with you. It does not give you the slice of the picture of people who have not interacted with you. And the danger in any company of any size, quite frankly, is that there are some people who, for example, who may just be done with IT. Like, I'm done. I don't want to interact with you. Like, screw you. I had a bad experience and never want to touch you again. And so the strategy I've employed in the past and that I'm still doing to this day is a quarterly CSAT survey to the whole company. I actually prefer not to survey the whole company. What I like to do is 25% of the company 4 times a year and never repeating the same people. But what I'm looking for is a dipstick test of how's your experience with IT interaction-wise? How's your experience with the equipment we issue you? And if you're in an office, how's your conference room experience? Like, are the conference rooms intuitive? Are they easy to use? So that we have a benchmark to measure against without assuming that we're touching the company through people and tickets, right? Like, it's a valid assumption that somebody who got help is having feedback to provide, but it's not a valid assumption to say that people that haven't interacted with you don't have an opinion. It's important to know both.
I love that. So essentially, by only polling the people that have already created a ticket, by definition, you have no sense of what the folks that don't know how to get in touch with IT or have given up on IT have. I love
exactly.
That. Mike, could not be more thankful for you taking the time. Good luck to you and the team continuing this, but
thank you.
Really, really appreciate you taking the time. And for all the webinar attendees, we will send the video, we'll send a write-up and stuff right after this. So thank you so much for attending, all of you. Bye.